Alright, just more reading from Synchronicity Through the Eyes of Science, Myth, and the Trickster by Alan Combs and Mark Holland. Right now, page 112, and the section is Stolen Intentions. When the trickster steals away one's purpose and turns it to his own amusement, he brings the hidden shadow out into the daylight. In the bargain, things turn out quite differently than we planned, since the trickster is often connected with storytelling. In the case of Hermes, even with writing, we will illustrate this point with an example from a well-known novel, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. The story is about Huck's trip down the Mississippi River with a runaway slave named Jim. Huck is a white boy who is part rogue and part rebel. Jim, in contrast, is a black man whose ways are foreign to the middle-class society into which Huck has been temporarily adopted by Widow Douglas. He comes from outside the white culture, which includes all the persons Huck most looks up to. People like the widow and Tom Sawyer, who perhaps more clearly represents Huck's ideal. As a black man and a slave, Jim is outside everything that forms Huck's ideal of who he is and who he should aspire to be. What is more, as literary critic Daniel Hoffman points out, Jim is knowledgeable in his own superstitious way of both the mysteries of nature and the spirits who people an unseen world surrounding both blacks and whites. And so Jim is a link to other realities. Jim is in his own right very human, at times quite touching. His humanity is not always apparent to Huck, who in moments of dissension is prone to dismiss him as simply a ignorant nigger. In typical trickster fashion, though, Jim's humanity is brought home to Huck when a joke he tries to play on Jim backfires. This occurs at a point early in the journey down the river when Huck and Jim become separated. Lost in a thick bank of fog, Huck is in a canoe and Jim remains on their raft. They spend most of the night on a dangerous stretch of the river, calling to each other but unable to make contact. After several hours, each falls asleep, exhausted. But before dawn, Huck sights the raft on the now clear river and paddles over to it, where he finds him asleep and amid a litter of mud, leaves, and broken branches deposited on the raft when it ran into the bank of a small island during the night. When Huck climbs up out of the raft, he decides to play a trick on his sleeping companion. He lies down, then, feigning noises of awakening, he arouses Jim from his sleep. When Jim sees Huck, he is overjoyed. He was sure that they had been separated permanently and was afraid that Huck had drowned during the night. But Huck, thinking to play a trick, feigns astonishment, asking him if he is drunk. He succeeds in convincing Jim that everything he is talking about must have happened to him in a dream. Always ready to credit anything to the supernatural, Jim accepts that he must have had quite a dream and begins right away to interpret it. Huck allows him to go on making a fool of himself until the dawning light of the morning, and reveals the broken branches and scattered leaves that cover the raft. Just as Jim finishes his interpretation of the dream, Huck points to the letter and asks, "What does these things stand for?" As far as Huck is concerned, the question is the punchline to his joke and the end of the whole affair. But the trickster steals Huck's joke from him. Jim turns to look around the raft and slowly realizes that he had no dream at all and that Huck had made a fool of him. But he is in no mood for joking. His thought during the night that he had lost his only companion, a boy he'd come to love. And so when he sees that Huck has tried to humiliate him, Jim turns to him and says, "What do they stand for?" As Gwen to tell you. When I got all wore out with work and with the calling for you and went to sleep, my heart was most broken because you was lost. And I didn't care no more what become of me did thereafter. Okay. And when I woke up and I found you back again, all safe and sound, the tears come in, and I got down on my knees and kissed your foot. I was so thankful, and all you was thinking about was how you could make a fool of old Jim with a lie. That truck ain't I can't remember. That truck that and trash. And trash is what people does puts dirt on the head and friends and makes them ashamed. I forgot about that. I remember reading Huckleberry Adventures of Huckleberry Finn a long time ago. I forgot about that. After delivering the speech, Jim walks into the raft's little wigwam, leaving Huck feeling ashamed enough to tell us I could almost kiss his feet to get him to take it back. After 15 minutes of struggling with himself, he goes to Jim and apologizes, telling us I weren't ever sorry for it afterwards. Neither. I didn't do him no more mean tricks, and I wouldn't done that one if I had known it would make him feel that way. Here, the reversal of Huck's joke becomes a revelation of Jim's humanity, because Huck's own statements force him to realize, to his shame, the other's feelings, to realize how he has hurt Jim. On a psychological level, the trickster, who capers for his own amusement, is not responsible for Huck's change in attitude towards gem, but only for the situation which provides Huck with the opportunity for change. That Huck was able to take advantage of it is a measure of his own humanity. While the archetypical trickster Hermes was both a thief and a patron of thieves, we may also call it, ironically, we may also recall that ironically he was at the same time patron of travelers. In the episode above, we see Huck's joke stolen and turned against him. Huck is thus given a humbling lesson in understanding his friend and companion as a fellow human being. To appreciate the trickster fully, however, he must not stop with his antics as a thief. We must turn to his contemporary role as patron of travelers. Traveling implies a goal, a movement from one place to another, and so it can represent, as it often does in mythology, literature, a journey towards growth. We see this in novels of the precarious tradition, such as Precaricus. Am I saying that right? I always say things wrong. Oh, God. It's got more than 2 syllables. I cannot say it. Picturesque. Picturesque.
Picaresque.
Picaresque. Relating to an episodic style of fiction dealing with adventures of a rough and dishonest but appealing hero. Picaresque.
Picaresque.
Picaresque. I didn't say that even close to right. I didn't say close to being right. So we see the novels of the picaresque tradition, such as Tom Jones or The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which usually trace the progress of a central character through several episodes that expose the follies of whatever society he happens to belong to. Often he grows into maturity through a series of rough or humorous adventures, satire, and comic reversals, and surprises which signify the presence of the trickster. The preceding episode from Huckleberry Finn also points out a more subtle side of. It must be out instead. Points up a more subtle side of the trickster, a side which comes from Hermes' role as guide of souls. The ancient Greeks believed that after death, the soul, or psyche, was guided to the underworld of Hermes, who could also guide persons out of the underworld, as he guided Eurydice when she. Am I saying that right? Nope. I'm having that moment. And it ain't gonna change. I ain't gonna change. And I can't worry what people think. I gotta force it my way. Eurydice. Eurydice.
Eurydice.
Eurydice. I got Eurydice. Eurydice. I swear to God, I'm stupid. I am. What god is Eurydice? Greek mythology, Eurydice was a nymph and one of the daughters of the god Apollo. She was married to Orpheus, a legendary musician and poet. So, Eurydice. Eurydice. I never would even have thought of that in a million years, would you? If you look at the spelling of it.
Eurydice.
Eurydice. Yes. Eurydice. Where are you? Okay. People who knew your patron because you know lessons of human beings are tricksters. Stop. So these traveling implies a moment from a place another, and so is represented, as often does the mythology and literature, and a journey towards the growth. We see the novels of Eurydice, and then I.
Picaresque.
Picaresque tradition. Okay, so I learned a couple words. So you, as he is guided. I'll just read this whole paragraph. The preceding episode from Huckleberry Finn also points up, or maybe out, maybe meant to be out, a more subtle side to the trickster, a side which comes from Hermes' role as a guide of souls, unless they made this a pun, and maybe it was deliberately done that way, because now he's going to talk about the underworld. And ancient Greeks believed that after death the soul, or psyche, was guided to the underworld of Hermes, who could also guide persons out of the underworld as he guided Eurydice when she began to follow Orpheus from Hades. This underworld of Hades was referred to as a place of riches, a world by Plato, a name which ruled by Pluto, a name which means wealth or riches. In terms of its psychological reality, therefore, the underworld of the unconscious is a place of riches for the psyche. Hermes guides the psyche to the unconscious as, for example, the dreams, and in so doing is the patron of travelers into the richness of the soul. He is also the god who brings the contents of this underworld out in the open by his synchronistic tricks. When Huck's joke on Jim is turned against him, and the reversal helps Huck see into himself, into Jim's real humanity, Huck is being led into the richness of the soul, the real life that is in Jim as a human being. Here Huck is guided towards the source of life. As trickster, Hermes acts for his own delight, yet gives us the opportunity for insight into our own darkness. Look for the archetypal trickster in any story of growth, for growth always means moving towards one's own human richness, which in turn means the growth of one's soul. Symbolic play. The trickster delights in frolicking with symbols. Synchronicity in such instances seems to mirror processes that are afoot deep in the psyche. Jumping across boundaries between the conscious and the unconscious, between the psychological and the physical, the trickster tosses out images in play that express the sheer vitality of the imagination. An example describing chapter 4 is the appearance of the series of fish the young encountered while writing on the meaning of the fish symbol. The appearance of the fish literally mirrored Young's current passion. If we take his own analysis seriously, however, it means a good deal more. The fish symbolize the nourishing influence of unconscious content, which maintain the vitality of consciousness by a continual influx of energy, for consciousness does not produce its energy by itself. In Jungian psychology, the appearance of fish in dreams fantasies and synchronistic coincidences usually is taken as a positive sign that the essential life of the unconscious is active. This means that the consciousness of mind is being nourished by the life-giving vitality of the unconscious. Certainly Jung was unusually well nourished. Another example of the symbolic play of the trickster, one known personally to us, involved butterflies and a 3-year-old boy. At the time, the boy suffered both physically and mentally from a variety of allergies that frequently made his life miserable. The day of September 22nd, 1986, however, seemed to mark the watershed in his return to health. On several occasions that day, the boy was visited by the appearance of butterflies. He was relaxed and at peace with himself on that day, exhibiting the full vitality of childhood. In the morning, he spontaneously painted several large, bright, colorful butterflies. On a late afternoon walk, he and his father saw a number of large butterflies soaring like birds high in the trees. Butterflies appeared again during dinner, which the family ate outside. Late in the evening, his mother read 2 stories to him, both of which, by seeming coincidence, mentioned butterflies. The first concerned fairies that were said to fly about like butterflies. The second was the Chinese tale of the philosopher who dreamed that he was a butterfly. Upon awakening, wondered if he could, on the other hand, actually be a butterfly, dreaming that he was a person. These were from a book of stories that they were reading through systematically, 1 or 2 stories each night. The butterfly is an ancient symbol. Its meaning is not difficult to guess. Perhaps no living creature goes through such a dynamic transformation and emerges with such beauty as the caterpillar that changes into a butterfly. Hence, the butterfly represents transformation. In this case, a healing transformation. The boy in question did not get well immediately, but this day, more than any other, seemed to be the one on which he began to move towards health. Careful examination of synchronistic coincidences often reveals that they compensate for personal needs or inadequacies. In Chapter 5, for example, we noted the importance of compensation and the meaning of dreams. Here we extend a similar notion to synchronicity. In some cases, compensation is almost obvious. For example, an acquaintance of the author gave the following account of her father, a previously hard-working businessman who had recently retired. In his free time, he had become interested in odd and ends repair work around the house, plumbing, a bit of carpentry, and minor electrical work. He had not previously been a great handyman, but it was obvious that such work had become a source of satisfaction for him, compensating, as it were, for the loss of his previously engaging professional life and easing his transition into retirement. Early in the summer, he and his wife spent a week with our acquaintance's family. During that week, more things went wrong with their house than during the entire previous 6 years that they had owned it. Windows jammed, a door stuck, light bulbs flashed and burnt out. One evening, a pipe under the bathroom sink split open for no apparent reason and began to spray water. The father was busy every minute fixing one thing after another. When he left, the problems abruptly disappeared. It was as if the father's satisfaction from such work had generated all the necessary conditions of needed repairs. But compensation in synchronistic events is often far from apparent. Take, for example, the appearance of the beetle at Jung's counseling room window at a critical moment in the therapy of a woman who was straitjacketed by a neurotic and inflexible view of reality. Jung was her third therapist, and he commented that evidently something quite irrational was needed, which was beyond my powers to produce. As we know, that something in the form of the beetle was supplied by the trickster. The very irrationality of the appearance, in her eyes at least, compensated so dramatically from her rigid beliefs that it jolted her into the beginning of a new worldview. When dealing with compensation, it is as dangerous to make a literal interpretation of synchronistic incidences as it is to assume such an interpretation of a dream events. A case in point is the man noted in chapter 5 who experiences a psychotic delusion that he was the savior of the world, attacking his wife with an axe and to exorcise the devil out of her. One does not have to be psychotic to have an inflated self-image. We are all at times prone to think too highly of ourselves. At such moments, the trickster may pay us a visit in the guise of a prankster, to bring us back to earth, to make us look foolish and ridiculous in little ways just when we want to look our best. He is adept at undercutting self-inflation. Recall Eshu, the West African trickster who, for the sheer delight of it, set friends against each other, exposing the flaws in the luster of their perfect relationship. By claiming to be ideal friends rather than imperfect companions with normal human limitations, they invited the trickster's mischief. The energy that they had put into denying the human part of their friendship returned in the power of trickster to plague them. Yet despite their strife, they were actually given more life rather than less. Issues pranks compensate for the superficial gloss of the farmer's idealized friendship. The point here is not that they were less than real friends, but rather that the real relationship in its superficial perfection was less than whole. So they were themselves less than whole. It was Issu's troublesome prank that provided the opportunity for them to become complete. Lame deer, medicine man, This is Lame Deer, medicine man of the American Lakota Sioux, the Western Sioux, tells us of his tribe's clowns and tricksters who play a similar role in bringing wholeness. Anyone can become a clown through no choice of his own, but simply because he dreams about lightning, the thunderbirds. When he's awakened in the morning, he has become a clown, an upside down, backward, forward, yes and no man, a country-wise. And now he must perform his dream for others to see. He has no choice. If he had a Hayotka clown dream, now which I would have to reenact, the thunder being would place something in that dream that I'd be ashamed of, ashamed to do in public, ashamed to own up to, something that's going to want me not to perform this act. And that is what's going on to torment me. Having had that dream, getting up in the morning, at once I would hear this noise in the ground, just under my feet. That rumbled of thunder. I'd know that before the day ends, the thunder will come through and hit me unless I perform the dream. I'm scared. I hide in a cellar. I cry. I ask for help. But there is no remedy until I have performed this act. Only this can free me. Maybe by doing it I receive some power, but most people would just as soon forget about it. What sort of performance must one put on that is so embarrassing? What must one act out? Obviously, it is not something that one is proud of. Rather, it is something that one would much rather keep under wraps. We are clearly dealing with the shadow here, and the clown, much as his mortification, is forced to act out for everyone's enjoyment. This is compensation at its best. He can no longer hide this side of himself, but must ultimately join in the laughter himself, accepting his skeleton in the closet as a joke. What's more, he is probably not that much different from everyone else. Others would have found themselves just as mortified had they been in his shoes. Not only does he confront his own hidden side, but others through watching him do the same in laughter. Humor is considered sacred among the Sioux, and the whole affair is not to be taken too seriously. It is an opportunity for a good belly laugh, and everyone is made more whole by it. Synchronistic coincidences are often compensatory, like dreams, like the antics of the Lakota clown. They place before us the facets of reality that we have previously swept under the rug. In this way, the trickster provides us with the possibility of greater self-understanding, though unlike the Lakota clown, where synchronicity is involved, we are not usually forced to take advantage of it. Huckleberry Finn exemplifies someone who has the grace and humility to learn from the experiences his own trickster puts him through. The next part will be individualization and the self. But I'm taking a bit of a break. Alright, individuation and the self. The turn of the trickster play is not always towards the part of the prankster. If shadow dancing brings out the worst in him, if he is at his most roguish in the service of the shadow, then he is at his best in the service of the essential aspect of the personality. The archetype Jung called the self, his appearance in connection with the archetype can mean that synchronistic coincidences are associated with the growth process termed individuation. Such growth occurs when the entire psyche comes under the governing influence of the self, most often in midlife. Jung describes the self as the archetype whose center is everywhere and whose circumference is nowhere. To feel the pull of this archetype is to feel the pull of destiny, and to sense in your most profound conscience your unique station and purpose in life. Jung says that we may think that this deepest voice within us as the voice of God, such a voice calling unto us our destiny, usually comes after one has succeeded in achieving the goals of youth. These heroic goals, such as climbing the career ladder or gaining the respect and admiration of one's peers, are collective goals in the sense that they are shared by all. There is little that is unique in them. Individuation, on the other hand, means to find one's uniqueness, to fully become an individual. It is usually accompanied by a period of disintegration of the old heroic goals, experienced by the ego as a crisis. This is the midlife crisis. It cannot be resolved by ego alone. There must be intercession by the highest source of purpose within the individual, the archetypical self. The trickster connection to the archetypical self is evident in various mythologies and the stories that present him in a role of mediator between human beings and the highest gods. As Hermes mediates between humankind and Zeus, Hermes' role as messenger of the gods, as well as his reputation as the friendliest of the gods to people, both suggest this mediating function. Pelton recognizes such a role in the West African trickster as well. It fits in naturally with our knowledge that the trickster is a god of boundaries, especially the boundaries between the known and the unknown. The highest gods are often distant gods, unknown directly by mortals, and the trickster is there to bridge that distance. His presence in liminal or threshold states means, in Pelton's words, that human beings have access through him to a source of creative power. By playing his tricks and functioning as a guide to the soul, the trickster enters the human world to make things happen, to recreate boundaries, to break and reestablish relationships, to reawaken consciousness of the presence and creative power the of the both the sacred center and the formless outside. In these last few words, Pelton's description corresponds almost word for word with Jung's description of the archetypical self. An example of the influence of the self that involves both a dream and a synchronistic coincidence is described by Robert Johnson in his book Inner Work. It concerns a woman who, in a dream, found herself in a monastic cloister, sitting with crossed legs in Zen style, in a cell connected to the chapel, but separated from it by a grill. In the dream, she experienced a state of great tranquility as she heard the Mass performed nearby. Though alone in her cell, she closed her eyes and received communion. At the end of the Mass, she discovered flowers blooming beside her chamber. This woman, who had grown up in a Catholic family, had early in adulthood rebelled against her religious background, becoming involved in the practice and philosophy of Zen Buddhism. The dream, however, seemed to signify a return to her family religion. Though the presence of the cross-legged meditation posture does not suggest a rejection of Zen, this posture in the monastic cloister creates an image of that which is contemplative in both the Christian and the Buddhist traditions. The flowers seem to celebrate this reconciliation. Flowers are also indicative of the closeness of the archetypical self and the unity that it represents. Johnson says such a symbol points to that archetype, the self, that transcends the opposites by revealing the central reality behind them and thereby unites them. Flowers are not only symbols of the feminine but also of the unified self. In Christianity, the rose that represents Christ. In Eastern religion, the thousand petals of petal lotus that portrays the One. Johnson believes that the gifts are of a notable dream such as this one deserves some type of ritual. Not knowing what else to do with this in mind, the woman picked some flowers similar to those in her dream, took them to the ocean and cast them onto the waves, giving the gift she had received back to Mother Earth, back to the feminine sea of consciousness. Upon returning home, the woman was surprised to find a friend waiting, one who did not frequently visit. On a drive together, they'd passed a monastery. The woman was startled because she felt as though she had been in a monastery ever since her dream of the previous night. To her surprise, her friend was one of the few laypersons given access to the cloister. She even had a key to the gate and suggested that they stop for a visit. Upon entering the chapel, the woman felt she had walked back into her dream. Every detail was just as it had been the night before. Placing herself in the meditative posture, she was able to recreate the entire mood of the dream. which swept back over her, filling her with serenity. In a short time, she was given permission to visit on her own, to meditate and spend quiet time there, nourishing that part of her that gave impetus to the dream. All of us experience dramatic episodes of synchronicity from time to time. But many synchronistic coincidences are not spectacular. The hand of the trickster may move with subtlety in our day-to-day lives, begetting synchronistic coincidences that take their place beside spontaneous thoughts, fantasies, and dream images to form entire the motives of related events. Le motives. What does that word mean? Instead of pretending I know it, which I don't, let's find out. This is spelled the
Leitmotif.
Leitmotif. I said that's completely wrong. Leitmotif. Leitmotif, a recurrent theme throughout a musical or literary composition associated with a particular person, idea, or situation.
Leitmotif.
It's okay, leitmotif. So, okay, in dream images from entire leitmotifs of related events, while the varied facets of our inner lives on the surface appear scattered and unconnected, a closer inspection we may find that they participate in a number of mini processes. To use Ira Progoff's term, that appear and reappear over time. Many processes may include memories that come to mind unbidden, things previously seen but now noted with interest for the first time, and desires to read certain books and see certain people, all focused on the theme that for some time remains unobserved. The use of a personal diary or journal, as Progoff suggests, may aid our recognition of many processes as they unfold. Whether or not you use a journal, however, regular attention to your inner life often allows these processes to become evident. A mini process may run a natural course or dissipate itself, or it may become part of a larger braid formed of a number of interwoven mini processes comprising a major theme in one's life. Here we are approaching what Progoff calls major life units, periods when one is focused on a particular activity, such as pursuing a career, becoming an effective parent, or developing a spiritual quest. Each of us can map out our own lives in terms of such units. They involve out of the Progoff calls our core creativity, the central nucleus of creativity in one's being. This latter concept is almost identical to Jung's notion of the archetypical self, as it is the core creativity that gives overall direction to one's life, bringing all major activities into alignment. The similarity is not surprising, considering that Progoff studied personally with Jung. Unbidden undivided, undivided attention, unabided additions to one's inner life that generate form from the core creativity are termed emergence, a word taken from the late 19th century French philosopher Henri Bergson, who used to refer to new and creative elements thrown up in the process of evolution. Progoff observes that emergence are in addition to causality. They cannot be anticipated or planned. And though he makes no point of it, this phrasing from an author who wrote an important book on synchronicity, Young, Synchronicity and Human Destiny, suggests that emergence includes synchronistic coincidences. Such a notion is consistent with the fact that emergence are rooted in unconscious creative processes. Our own observations suggest that the emergence include many small coincidences, as well as occasional dramatic ones, which aid the flow of one's life. For instance, you may come across books, and friends, and poems, and other emergences that give support to your personal direction. To pursue your core creativity is to make life choices on the basis of what feels most deeply rewarding and satisfying, rather than what society dictates or what others think is best for us. This is individualization. Joseph Campbell simply called it following your bliss. In The Power of Myth, a well-known series of interviews he made with journalist Bill Moyers shortly before his death, Campbell emphasized the importance of discovering exactly what it is that leads each of us to personal bliss or satisfaction. This can be anything: professional work of a particular sort, writing, painting, service to others, hiking alone in mountains. The vital point is that we get it done, that we don't live our lives according to the directions of others, but follow the inspiration and promptings that arise from within and have deeply personal value. This means that one must be able to say no to the incessant demands of an impersonal, bureaucratic world. Campbell points out that we are beset by a constant barrage of demands to become involved in more and more activities that give us no fundamental satisfaction. While such activities may seem to carry us further along in the profession or elevate us in the community, they may ultimately leave us empty, betraying us to a desolate inner self. They may mean nothing to the unconscious, instead carry us further and further from our true being, from our core activity, from the archetypical self. If we are to follow the path of individualization, we must make conscious choices about what is truly of value and what is not. Both Campbell and Moyers point out that when we choose to follow our bliss, when we make choices based upon an inner sense of fulfillment rather than outer demands, there is often a sense of hidden hands, of unexpected opportunities and unanticipated resources. This is a synchronicity in the service of the individualization. It is the influence of self in the world of human affairs that makes itself felt when we submit to the deep call of our being. Carl Jung termed this the law of synchronicity. meaning that when we are in accord with the archetypical process, then that archetype, in this case, the self, can influence events around us even at a distance. As the old Taoist saying, the right man sitting in his house and thinking the right thought will be heard by 100 miles. The right man sitting in his house and thinking the right thought will be heard 100 miles distant. Even without a conscious choice to follow your bliss, at critical moments in our lives, the unconscious sometimes takes things into its own hands, as it were, in the form of synchronistic coincidences that trigger new phases in our lives. In The Shared Heart, author Joyce Vassell tells of her indecision to marry her husband Barry, a decision that has led to a remarkably creative relationship, but one that occurred only after much consternation over their both coming from different religious backgrounds. At one point, this conflict even led to their decision not to see each other again. At the point when things seemed hopeless, the mother of one of Joyce's friends felt an impulse to give her a poem from a prayer book. Underlined in the poem was the passage, "Above all else, love is important." This was eventually enough to trigger a major shift in Joyce's perspective, which she was able to communicate to Barry, and they were married shortly afterward. Sometimes the obvious influence of coincidence on our lives is even more dramatic. Progoff notes that Abraham Lincoln's career in law, or ultimately his presidency, is due to, in part, to the unexpected acquisition of a barrel full of odds and ends, including a complete edition of Blackstone's Commentaries, a set of books that played a major role in the development of his interest in law. We saw at the beginning of this book the impact of the fortuitous coincidences upon the lives of Winston Churchill and Adolf Hitler. Indeed, there are many instances of lives actually being saved by a fortuitous happenstance that stretches the limits of the meaningless chance. In the challenge of chance, author Koestler recounts a story concerning the British actor Sir Alex Guinness, who overslept one Sunday morning, despite the fact that he used 2 alarm clocks and missed his regular train from London to his home near Petersfield. That morning there was a railroad accident which involved the train and, in fact, the very car in which he would have been riding. This was a doubly unusual situation in that when Guinness first awoke, he misread the time, thinking that he had not overslept at all. Were it not for this, he might well have decided to skip his regular attendance of Mass in order to catch his were it not for this, he might well have decided to skip his regular attendance of Mass in order to catch his usual train. As it happened, he went to the 9 a.m. Mass thinking all the while that it was 8 a.m. service, and then proceeded to catch a later train. Frequent news items tell us tell of people, especially infants, who survive severe car accidents or long falls virtually unscratched. Interestingly, a survey of 28 train accidents that took place between 1950 and 1955 revealed that significantly fewer people rode the train on the days of the accidents than on comparable days in earlier weeks and months. These individuals, for whatever reasons, did not make it to the train on the days of the accident. The March 1950 issue of Life magazine reported that the entire membership of a church choir in Beatrice, Nebraska, arrived late for practice one evening, 5 minutes after the scheduled meeting time of 7:20 p.m. The building exploded. The minister and his wife were delayed while she ironed his daughter's dress. One member needed to complete a geometry problem, and then the other had difficulty waking her daughters from a nap. Another waited to finish hearing a radio program. One couldn't start a car, and so on. Warren Weaver and Lady Luck, the theory of probability, estimated the probability of this incident at less than 1 in 1 million. I don't know how you figure that one out. Returning to this theme of individuation, the following series of incidences reported by an acquaintance of ours reveal the influence of the archetypical self. Progoff, core of creativity expressed in a variety of ways, including a dream, a synchronistic coincidence, and a spontaneously written poem. These separate elements ultimately form a single pattern in one's life. The story begins some years ago when the acquaintance was working near a beach where he saw hang gliders daily. And they triggered something deep in him because he dreamed shortly afterward that he was standing on the edge of a cliff with wings like a bird. Rather than overlooking the sea, however, as he faced a desert with a horizon lit by the glow of the pre-dawn sky, it was as if he were on the verge of flying up over the sand into the dawn. 2 days later, he received a shipment of books from his mother. Opening it, he found a plaque on top with the likeness of a winged man standing on the ridge as if to take flight. We definitely have read more than an hour then, I guess, according to this. The theme of flying, especially flying towards the sunrise, was not new to him. 2 years before, shortly after returning from a vision quest, a kind of spiritual retreat in the desert, he was moved to write a poem which, it turns out, contains much of the same symbolism. As the body becomes motionless, the urge to fly moves deep within. The sky bird flutters towards the east. The sky grows bitter, flying over the tattered masses. The medicine bearer searches out the living waters. He remarked that as an outer activity became silent, there begins the motion of the inner sense of soaring. The poem reminded him of the Hermetic ascension, which, according to the esoteric tradition attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, Trismegistus. I never could say that. Hermes Trismegistus of the 2nd century Alexandria is the upward path of the soul when released from the confinement of the body. It is a clear instance of hermetic journeying as described in chapter 5. The tattered masses of the poem are the desert of the dream, and both instances the ascent is made into the light of the dawn sky, signifying the coming of the sun. Behind this series of events lies a spiritual impetus. The sun, as we have seen, symbolizes the archetype of self, but it also symbolizes the highest pinnacle of human spirit, the atom, the A-T-M-A-M. For Jung, the self is the origin of the whole personality. It is the relation or identity of the person with the super-personal atom. The self provides a perspective, a line of vision in the direction of the greater transpersonal self, the atom. The water in the poem points to both the collective unconscious and the upwelling of all archetypes, to the nourishment of the ascended spirit. Now would be a good place to stop, as my shoulder blades are burning like hell.